Hello and welcome to this episode of the Digital Disruption Podcast brought to you by Novus Strategy. My name is Chris Williams, Transformation and Strategy Partner. And joining me today is Yaiza Luengo from the Mortgage Advice Bureau. Yaiza, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So your article was really interesting. I found it fascinating. And I think obviously the content of it was excellent, but what really stood out to me was the title. The market is not short of ideas, it's short of joined up delivery, which I couldn't agree with more. It most definitely is. And as we kind of get into it a little bit more, the first sort of area I'd like to look at is sort of ideas versus execution. You make it clear a distinction between innovation and execution, but why do you think execution has become the real constraint in the market at the moment?
I think that's why I called the article what I did. The mortgage market isn't short of ideas, it's short of joined up delivery because we've had innovation, platforms, proofs of concept for years. The constraint now is an imagination, is that disciplined execution. So execution requires leadership, follow through, willingness to invest in complex end-to-end builds, even when they're less exciting that latest shiny tool. And it means holding your nerve and doing the structural work, which without that innovation just gets layered into old models and that friction remains. And I think that's what really differentiates those that are successful in this, those that aren't. If you're moving forward, you have to do that fundamental transformation to deliver change rather than just doing builds. And ideas are not really at the heart of the problem. It's the delivery.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting because when I look at the ecosystem, we've spent the last sort of 20 years digitizing component parts, and we refer to it as Novus now, as we're kind of trying to connect the ecosystem, and it's the execution of sort of connected it. And from the outside looking in, obviously lots of people, consumers, customers, but also colleagues in the industry, they're kind of almost suffering from transformation fatigue. There's been lots of digitization going on, and people often sort of look at this market and say, look, the mortgage market is slow to change, it's slow to transform, what's been happening. So from the inside it does feel very busy, but where is that disconnect and sort of where does that come from?
I think that disconnect for me is that things are happening in silos. And a lot of my role as COO, so I'm COO, but I cover technology and marketing, and it's bringing that together and that delivery that's key. And I think a lot of firms have separated that. They've put product under technology and forgetting about the customer. And I think that's really at the heart of the disconnect because from the outside, people see the customer journey and it can still feel fragmented and repetitive. But yet, from the inside, as you say, there's lots of constant activity, new platforms, regulatory changes, automation projects, AI pilots everywhere you look. It's busy, but that disconnect happens because it's happening in those silos. Teams optimize locally, the systems are improved kind of function by function. So internally it feels less than dynamic, but externally the customer is so internally it feels dynamic, but it's less than dynamic externally. The customer is still getting the handoffs, the rekeying, the duplication, because activity isn't the same as having a joined up process and experience. And I think that's where you get that dichotomy of how it feels for the industry versus how it's feeling for the customer.
Well, we've been through this first phase of transformation in this sector, and the first phase is that vertical phase. It's where incumbent actors and vendors digitize core component parts of the ecosystem. We've now moved to the horizontal phase. This is where the ecosystem becomes interoperable, it becomes connected. And when we look at that sort of fragmentation and structure, this is where HDI or horizontal digital integration is the sort of operating model and a key strategic pillar really to sort of bring that together and just sort of turn into that for a moment now, that sort of fragmentation and structure piece. You talk about in your article teams being optimized locally and success being measured in silos, which I thought was a really interesting point. How does that shape the customer and advisor experience if that's what's happening today? How's that shaping it going forward?
I think that it's sort of structural and in why you get that sort of cause and effect that you're seeing. Um, when how does the customer and advisor and experience change? Well, that horizontal integration means that you're looking at the the case from every angle possible.
Yeah.
And every angle that's needed to be looked at. And that's why we always believe in the human in the loop and so on, because you need that, the IQ and the EQ. You can have the best system in the world, but if it's not fitting the needs, it's not working, is it? And I think when teams are optimized locally, they design around their function, not around an outcome, not around the end-to-end outcome. So that creates predictable consequences. The handoffs are between teams, the repeated checks, the entering the same data, the delays when something sits in between those responsibilities and the teams. And each part may work well individually, but end-to-end it doesn't quite connect. And that's what COOs do really well. And that's what data does really well. So CEOs of the future are all thinking about AI, not because they're thinking about the native tiny thing, it's because they realize finally that data is the steel thread amongst everything. And for advisors, this means more time managing processes, and for customers, it means more friction and uncertainty. Even if no single team is failing, when that steel thread of data isn't coming through end to end.
I think that leads sort of neatly into my next question, actually, because in your article, and it was a line that really stood out to me, actually, was that you refer to it as digitizing existing efficiencies rather than reimagining them. You're essentially saying that, look, we're doing things, we're digitizing existing inefficient things, and then but we should really be reimagining them. And when I look at that, I think there's a distinct difference between change and transformation. So to me, change is building a better version of the past, whereas transformation is about fundamentally reimagining sort of how we do things. So that line really kind of stood out to me. Why is it so hard to kind of step back and redesign more fundamentally? Because we've got a configuration problem, haven't we, really?
We do. And look, I was once asked, I was actually asked by Peter when I first met him, he said, the people that do BAU are not the same people that do transformation. And everyone likes to think they do change and transformation, but it's not the same. And through years of working in banking, we understood the difference. We actually created different categories, incremental change away from transformation, because to be transformative, you have to be a rebel with a cause. and you have to be that person that fundamentally wants to do things differently for the same purpose, for that same cause. You have to have a shared cause with the business, but you have to fundamentally think about it differently, because most organizations are built around how work has historically been delivered internally. And those are delivery-led operating models where they become embedded in systems, in incentives, in reporting lines. Everybody knows what they're doing and they're all busy, but sometimes busy in the wrong direction a lot of the time. So it's easier to digitalize what already exists than to reimagine it, because then you have to bring all that alignment in the organization. So good sort of chief transformation officers or chief strategists understand that alignment is key, so that we automate existing, we don't want to automate existing inefficiencies. Rather than asking, if we were designing this from scratch around the customer outcome, what would it look like? And we know customer preferences have changed dramatically, and everyone's struggling to change with that. We now have shorter attention spans, higher expectations of efficiency and effectiveness. Nobody wants their money to go missing, and everyone wants to transact as quickly as they can book a flight, So fundamental redesign requires that structural change. And that is harder, slower, more politically complex inside organizations than just implementing a new tool. So organizations tend to gravitate to the path of least resistance, which is doing change, but not necessarily doing transformation, as you say.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's interesting, and you also say that you cannot automate your way out of fragmentation in your article. Again, a great line. But what's got to be fixed before automation really begins to deliver value?
Oh, the fragmentation itself. And that's why my operating model within MAB is very different than what you'll see in other businesses. I've separated product out of technology, created a standalone data function, and created a standalone digital marketing arm that connects everything end to end together. And if you're not structurally right, you won't deliver the right transformation. Because if the underlying operating model is disjointed with poor data flow, unclear ownership of journeys, the seams between the advisors, the lenders, and the third parties, they start to open, and automation can actually accelerate friction rather than remove it. So before automation delivers real value, you kind of need four key things. You need that clear end-to-end journey ownership. You need better data flow across organizations, with horizontal data integration being key. You need reduced handoffs, because a lot of this doesn't need to be a handoff, it should just happen. And shared accountability for the outcome. And now, technology is not an outcome in its own right. Technology works best when the structure it sits on is coherent, and that's what we need to work on, and that's why I bring both together.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Let's turn to AI now. It's a bit of a buzz topic, rightly so. But AI in the right context is kind of what I want to touch on in these sort of couple of questions. You describe in your article AI's most effective role as supporting judgment, sensitive or sensing issues early, and improving timing. Where are you seeing that used intelligently today, either whether it's within your own business, at the Mortgage Advice Bureau, or elsewhere in the market?
I think for me, AI. So I've been in data a very long time, long before it was sexy. Back when you couldn't get anyone to attend a data governance committee. And so for me, it's really not about the AI, it's about the data and the decisioning that it allows you to do. Obviously, we know that allows you to be generative or automated with agents, and it allows you to do different things. But they're all versions of things we've seen already with robotics or machine learning for many years. And so that shapes my view through just many years of experience, that the most effective use of AI in this sector isn't in autonomous decision making, it's in decision support. And I make that differentiation because used well, AI reduces manual effort, it improves the data quality, system is learning continuously, it surfaces issues earlier because it allows you to do sensing, and it prioritizes attention. The attention that you give so that you know where the customer needs you and doesn't need you. And we aligned the fulfillment model for our cases to the customer's reality. Do they want more digital, more automated? Do they want more personalized? They can have both, and we want to be able to sense that in order to give the personalized experience that others only really talk about, by sort of badging things AI, because it should sense and predict rather than replace judgment. It helps disrupt a rigid process and the rhythms of that process. So organizations can be more proactive, more multi-channel, needs led, instead of just reacting to predefined stages. We've all been through those digital processes where fill this, wait for that, status update, little nice bar at the top. But in a regulated environment, humans must remain firmly in the loop. So accountability, explainability, and governance don't just disappear because the tooling improved. And so AI is the right tool to improve decision support, but not to automate decision making, and to also give a more personalized and effective engagement model than ever before. But again, with the human in the loop.
Yeah, no, makes complete sense. Timing is pretty much a recurring theme in your article. You talk about it quite a bit. How important is anticipating need rather than simply reacting to process stages? How important is that?
I think that's going to be the differentiator from the firms
Right.
that rise to the top and the ones that don't. Because if I think everyone's had that experience of talking to an LLM and feeling like they have to explain themselves. Or why? I think there's very clear to those of us who have written models that the level of intelligence, we talk about the level of intelligence of a model, or the R. And we love we love talking about it because it's almost like it's been overhyped as if it has the same level of intelligence as a human. And right now it does not. So timing is everything, and it's critical in life and in business. But it's also because a human can sense this already in a way that models have to be heavily trained to even try to approximate. They can't currently replace the level of sensing that a human can do. And so, if you only react to those process milestones, that little step bar at the top, you're always going to be behind the customer's real need. And intelligent systems should sense life events, financial changes,
Yeah.
behavioral signals, and prompt earlier and more relevant engagement. So, I can tell if you've had a promotion, what that might open up for you if your outgoing start to increase, what options for better products, options that may open up for you. And so anticipating means shifting from being process led to being customer need led, and it removes that guesswork, and so everything becomes more intuitive rather than administrative. The very basic examples of this is, oh, you were looking for a flight to Jamaica, would you like a hotel? Well, it doesn't take a huge amount of AI to create that sort of correlation for you and appear useful and customer led. But if I start saying things like, I hear you've booked a flight to Jamaica and your health insurance or travel insurance is actually expiring midway through that trip, here are some options for how you might want to enhance or extend your cover, potentially with your existing provider if you're happy with them, or here are some others. I've leveled up. Fulfilling your needs dramatically rather than just offer you a hotel.
And it's interesting because I think one of the significant opportunities that HDI, horizontal digital integration, and a interoperable ecosystem in the home buying and selling market actually offers is there's been a huge amount of digitization in speed to offer. For me, the new battleground is absolutely speed to completion. And by getting this right, that unlocks much better in life product servicing, which talks to sort of a lot of what you've just said there. Turning to sort of cultural and structural shifts now, you suggest that the shift required is as much cultural as technological in this industry. What does that cultural I'm going to say transformation rather than change. What does that cultural transformation sort of look like in leadership terms?
I think for this is something that, we learned in banking a while ago when we started asking who owns the customer instead of who owns the step in the process. So the leadership needs to prioritize the end-to-end outcomes over in departmental metrics. It needs to encourage shared accountability for journeys. I mean, my team at MAB will tell you it's a little bit of a culture shock for them, but I bring them together and they work in groups a lot of the time. Collaboration is key, and they need to have shared skin in the game, so that aligned incentives around those customer results, not just internal efficiency, is key. And I think from a leadership point of view, we have to hold our nerve to invest in structural fixes rather than short-term wins.
Mm.
So it's a mindset shift as much as a system change. We all seen how the market react to, news of AI and changes in AI, and you have to hold your nerve as, leading a business.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. And as we sort of conclude this podcast, we're going to sort of just look at sort of what good actually looks like. And if we genuinely sort of designed around the end-to-end or designed around end-to-end outcomes, what would the sort of mortgage advisors, the brokers, what would they notice first?
I think that notice fewer rekeys, fewer repeated information, earlier identification of issues before the case stalls. Because, you said velocity is important, but we hardly ever know until it starts to slow down that it's slowing down. So earlier identification of those issues is where we're going to gain ground. Cleaner data, better prioritization of the cases, because we all know they've got different tempos, and less time chasing those updates because the information is more available. So in practical terms, less time managing process, more time advising. That's where the value is.
Yeah, definitely. And just finally then, and what would customers experience differently, even if they never saw the technology behind it, or the great things that can and will happen. What ultimately is the customer going to experience differently?
I think that's a great question, and it's key, right? Customers might not notice the technology at all. And actually I quite like it if they didn't. They would notice the intelligence, they would notice the fit. These guys know me, these guys just make it easy for me. This feels natural. So they experience that clearer communication about what's needed and what's happening next. Uh, clean instructions, fewer repeated requests for the same information, smoother progression throughout the journey, and just services that feel aligned. Like I said earlier about the trip to Jamaica, aligned to their life and their financial context. Ultimately, you will feel less like a transaction and more like support for their financial lives. Creating homes for their financial future, not just processing a mortgage. Because ultimately, we care, and it's what attracted me to MAB. We fundamentally care about getting good outcomes for customers, and people having homes. So that's the point. The next phase of disruption shouldn't be loud or flashy. It will be quieter, less visible, but far more impactful.
Yaiza, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you for contributing to the Digital Disruption newsletter. And of course, thank you for joining us on today's podcast. Of course, if you like and enjoy this podcast, please do subscribe, like, and share. If you're one of our first-time listeners and you'd like to get access to the Digital Disruption newsletter that Yaiza kindly contributed to, you can visit novus-strategy.com and subscribe to it there. But for now, Yaiza, once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.